The Facebook Live. I will mute myself now. And once I see viewers started joining in, I'll just leave a message in the chat box.
Okay. I'll put my slides up now, actually, so people don't have to just look at my face. Okay, hello everybody, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining me for this presentation on PDA, which is Pathological Demand Avoidance. I'm Laura Kerbey. I am the founder of an organisation called PAST, which is Positive Assessment, Support and Training. We do autism and demand avoidance assessments. We also provide a lot of support to families of neurodivergent children, whether they're diagnosed or not. Most families contact me because they believe their children have a PDA profile. I do lots of training in schools and colleges, and I'm also one of the directors of an organisation that provides bespoke tutoring packages for children who can't go to school. We call that AOTAS in the UK, which stands for Education Other Than at School. So these are children and young people who are unable to access school or college, usually because of their anxiety. And of the 50 plus children and young people that we are providing AOTAS to, they are almost all autistic with a PDA profile. I'm also the author of this book, which is the Educator's Experience of Pathological Demand Avoidance, which is what it says it is. It's a kind of collection of my experiences, both good and bad, of working with these amazing young people with this profile over the last 20 odd years now. So the illustrations that you're going to see in this, I'm just going to do a short presentation and then we'll have some time for questions, but the illustrations that you'll see in the presentation are from the book and are drawn by my friend Eliza Fricker. Eliza has also written another book on PDA, which is the family experience of PDA, which is also a really brilliant and very helpful guide. So some of you who are watching this may not have heard of PDA before. PDA is a type of autism or a profile of autism. So to have a PDA profile, you have to be autistic or diagnosed autistic, and that the type of autism, PDA is a type of autism that is characterized by very high anxiety and a need to avoid demands and remain in control at all times. Now, these are, I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a moment, but these are the main characteristics of pathological demand avoidance. The first is resisting and avoiding ordinary demands of life. So that can be anything. It can be getting up in the morning, going back to bed at night, cleaning teeth, even things like going to the toilet, anything that basically is perceived as a demand, whether it is a spoken demand, a silent demand or expectation. And most importantly, with a PDA profile, we also see demand avoidance about internal demands. So the things that the young people themselves, the individuals themselves actually want to do, they themselves become a demand and are then perceived as a threat. And because they're perceived as a threat, that then creates an anxiety-based response. When we're doing our PDA assessments, we don't just look at the type of demands that are avoided and why the demands are avoided, but we also look at how the demands are avoided. And individuals with a PDA profile are often very socially aware, very socially savvy, and they will then use social strategies to help avoid the demand. So that can be things like distracting. I'm very easily distracted because I have an ADHD diagnosis, and sometimes I will ask one of the children or young people that I work with to do something, and they won't say no. It won't be like obvious no or refusal. They'll just start asking me questions about things or chatting to me about something else, and very subtly avoid the demand. So it's not always a no, not doing it. It can be much more kind of complicated than that. As I've said, PDAs are usually very, often very sociable. They usually like being around other people, are quite socially driven, but they are still autistic. So they do lack depth in their understanding of social situations. So as one of my PDA clients said to me the other day, Laura, I'm brilliant at making friends, but I'm terrible at keeping them, because they just make so many sort of social mistakes. We see lots of mood swings and impulsivity within the profile, sort of being, very sort of, could be very sort of charming and happy one moment, and then very quickly going into more of a sort of anxiety type presentation, which could look like, anger. We also see a lot of role play in the presentation as well, and sometimes that can be quite extreme. And role play can be used to avoid demands or comply with demands. So I've worked with children who will pretend to be a dog or a cat if they're asked to do something, and you ask them to do some writing and they say, well, I can't pick up pens because I'm a dog and I've got paws. But I've also worked with children. Recently, a family was explaining to me that the only way that they could get their daughter to drink on holiday when it was very hot was by pouring water into a bowl on the floor, and then the little girl would drink the water from the floor like a dog. Sometimes, though, it's very, very important to say that the role play is very, very subtle. And I've worked with lots of children and young people who will just put on a mask of being fine at school, don't do anything to draw attention to themselves, just sort of, keep themselves very much sort of under the radar. And those are the children whose parents go into school and say, my child is really, really struggling. We can't get them in the morning, or when they come home from school, they're going into meltdown or going into shutdown. And those teachers in the school say, well, we don't see anything here. They're fine, and they're not fine. They're just playing a role of being fine. We also see very obsessive behavior, which is usually or often focused on people as well. So becoming, they really, really become very fixated perhaps on another child in school. And it can be a loving obsession. So they don't want anybody else to play with that child, or it can be a loathing obsession. And it could be, I hate that person. If they go near them, they might physically or verbally abuse them. The obsessive behaviors might also be on siblings. It could be, famous people, but becoming, very, very obsessed with that person. So there's a lot more to PDA than just demand avoidance. And some of you might be, like when I introduced the slide earlier, you might be thinking, well, we're all demand avoidant. Does that mean I have PDA? Well, probably not, because demand avoidance is something that we all do. It is human nature to avoid demands that are either boring or frightening or uncomfortable or painful. And that's known as rational demand avoidance. So when we're doing our PDA assessments, it's really, really important that we really try and dig down and find out why the individual is avoiding the demand. So a good example would be, you might have a child who says that they want to go to the cinema, and they're really looking forward to going to the cinema. And then on the day that you get them up and get them ready to go to the cinema to see a film that they've been wanting to watch for months, and they've been asking you for months, can we go, and you finally get them to finally get your tickets, and then that morning they just say, no, I can't go. And you say, why? What's wrong? Do you not feel very well? Are you too tired? And they might just be saying, no, I really want to go, but I just can't. And that's the demand avoidance. The demand of going to the cinema is too much. Now, when we then need to unpick that, is to actually find out, are you worried about going to the cinema because it's too noisy, or it's too busy, or the seats aren't comfortable enough, or you're worried about bumping into somebody that you know from school, or whatever it is. And we have to try and rule out all those other kind of like rational types of demand avoidance to then establish whether or not the demand avoidance is in fact pathological. We do have to look for demand avoidance as part of the autism assessment under the NICE guidance here in the UK. And again, that's why it's so important to sort of try and establish what type of demand avoidance it is. We also see demand avoidance within the ADHD profile as well. So as I've said, I have an ADHD diagnosis myself, and I will often avoid things that are boring, not particularly stimulating. So for example, I really enjoy doing autism assessments. I find it very, very interesting, fascinating work. But then when I finish the assessment, I have to write up a report, and I find the report part quite boring because I've done all the exciting, interesting stuff in my head. I find all the conversations that I have with my colleagues and the children very, very fascinating and stimulating. When I have to then put that all onto paper, I find that part quite dull. So then that's when I experience demand avoidance. But again, there is a rational reason for that. With PDA, as I've said, the demand avoidance is often irrational, and individuals will avoid things that they want to do as well as things that they don't want to do. And I had a couple of incredibly good examples of this. Recently, I've just handed in my next book, which is for teenagers with PDA. And this was a theme that came up when I spoke to all of them. And one of the teenagers that I interviewed gave a brilliant example. And she said that when she was 13, asked for a bass guitar. And she'd been wanting to play bass guitar for a long, long time. And she got this bass guitar, and she was absolutely, over the moon with it. But she's now 18, so nearly 5 years later, she hasn't once been able to pick up that bass guitar. She says it's in the corner of her room, in the case. She said every time she looks at it, she feels this surge of anxiety. I should be playing it. I'm meant to be playing it. And she also explained that she feels quite guilty because her parents spent money on this bass guitar, but she said, I just can't do it. I just can't. The demand of picking it up and starting to play it is just so great. I can't do it. Another young person that I interviewed told me about how once he wasn't able to get in the shower for about 5 weeks, and he said he felt utterly disgusted with himself. He said he thought, I'm just a disgusting human being, I can't get in the shower. And he wanted to have a shower, but he said the more pressure he put himself under to get in the shower, the harder it got. And he said the lowest point was when his mum, who's absolutely lovely, offered him £5 to have a shower. And he said that just made it even worse because he just thought, this is pathetic. I can't even get in the shower, and my mum has to bribe me. So he said that the bribe, although very well intentioned, actually made him feel even more that he couldn't do it. So here in the UK, you can't actually get a diagnosis of PDA, or pathological demand avoidance, as a standalone condition, that it doesn't currently feature in our diagnostic manuals. So at the moment, most places in the UK will diagnose autism with demand avoidance, or autism with extreme demand avoidance, or autism with a PDA profile. So again, you have to get that autism part before you get the PDA part. And again, in the UK, what we have to remind people, and I know it's I've spoken to colleagues in the States as well, that the reasonable adjustments and the adaptations that we have to make for young people should be based on need and not diagnosis. And actually, some of the best schools I've worked with have actually made incredible adjustments and done amazing work for children and young people with PDA without a diagnosis. And I also always say to families, you don't have to have a diagnosis to change the way you parent. You know, you can really sort of change the way that you support your child. You can create a very low demand environment without a diagnosis. So one of the things that I actually talk about in my book is that PDA used to, scare me. When I first started working in a school for children who were autistic 13 years ago now, I went into this school thinking that I knew a lot about autism, lots and lots of strategies that had worked really, really well in my previous settings. I've got a postgrad in autism. I had 8 years experience. I thought I knew what I was doing. And I went into this school where there were young people with undiagnosed PDA, and just made so many mistakes and got it so wrong. And then had this light bulb moment when a parent asked me to look at PDA. They'd read about it. They thought it really, fitted their child. I read about it and was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. And then when I read about PDA, I realized that actually everything that I was doing was wrong, and that it was me. I needed to change my approach drastically to be able to support these young people properly, which is what I learned to do. And then the second part of my book has another confession, which is that when you work in education, you're not meant to have favorites, but I do, and they've all got PDA, and I genuinely love working with PDAs now. They are you're not meant to have favorites, but working with PDA individuals is just my favorite, because they're just, when you get it right, they are just so much fun to work with, and you can get so much done kind of together. So really important to say that everybody who has PDA is very different and very unique. Like anybody who's autistic, everybody has their own individual kind of profile. So that's very important that we recognize that. And even with the children that I work with, they might have the same diagnosis, but they have very differing needs. So I have to really adapt, again, my kind of approach, the strategies that I use to make sure that I'm working with individuals. Really, really important, if you're watching this as a professional as well, is to understand that the most important thing for you to do if you work with someone with PDA is to build up a trust. One of the chapters in the book is entitled "The Antidote to Anxiety is Trust," and it's so important. PDA has experienced such high anxiety at all times, and if they don't feel safe with you, then their anxiety will be heightened. So taking your time to build that really, really safe and trusting connection is absolutely essential. It's also really important to recognize that anxiety can look like lots of other things as well. Some of the most anxious children that I've worked with don't actually look anxious. Some of the most anxious children that I've worked with have been described as, arrogant or overconfident, aggressive or angry. But they are not any of those things. They are just incredibly anxious young people. So relationships and connections are just everything when you work with someone with PDA, and you have to build up a very genuine and authentic relationship as well, because PDA is very, very good at being aware of anything that is fake, anything that's not genuine. Your PDAs will pick up on it. Another really, really important point to understand about PDA is that someone with PDA may not recognize hierarchy or authority. So I've always described the PDAs that I work with as being like adults trapped in children's bodies. Like, they just don't identify often as children. So that means in a home environment, they might, just not, you could say to a child with PDA, you need to do it because I say so, I'm your mum. That will not mean anything to a PDA. They might start trying to parent your other children because they just don't see themselves as a child. They see themselves as, as potentially an adult. And in a school setting, the same can apply. Other, neurotypical children in the school will usually do what they're told or asked to do because a teacher is telling them to do it, and they recognize, they perceive an authority. Oh, if an adult is telling me to do something, I need to do it because I'm a child. And again, PDAs just don't think like that. It's really, really important to be aware, again, as I said, of the anxiety that our PDAs are carrying around with them at all times. Now, this is the anxiety bucket analogy. So we all carry around an anxiety bucket, and all day that bucket is being filled with things like, stress, demands. It could be sensory stuff. It could be anything. For the neurotypical individual, their bucket has got lots of holes in it. This bucket doesn't have any, but the neurotypical individual will have holes in their bucket. So that means that as those things are filling the bucket, they can process it, and the anxiety is constantly sort of trickling away. So for that individual, it would take something very big or very unusual for the bucket to fill up. But for a neurodivergent individual, their bucket either doesn't have any holes or it might have one tiny little hole. So what that means is throughout the day, their bucket is filling up, and then it gets full. And it can take a long time then for the contents of the bucket to evaporate. So a lot of children that I work with will come home with a really, really full bucket when they've been in school. And what that means is that they don't have capacity for any more demands when they get home. So the child might come home and just need to go in their room and do absolutely nothing. They don't have the capacity to get changed out of their school uniform or do homework or come and sit downstairs and eat their dinner. But it's just all too much. Their bucket is full. So it's really important that we can try and recognise what fills an individual's bucket, but also what empties the bucket as well. And if we can increase the bucket emptiers and decrease, or identify and decrease the bucket fillers, that can help reduce the frequency in which the bucket fills up. But it's really important to remember that with a PDA profile, there will always be anxiety in the bucket. That again came across very strongly when I was interviewing the PDAs for my latest book. Most of them just said, well, we just feel anxious all the time. So another thing that's really, really important to understand is that PDAs need autonomy. And I should have a slide on that. Sorry, I'll just go see if I can find, here we are. So pathological demand avoidance is sometimes referred to as either a pervasive or persistent drive for autonomy. And those terms were coined by Tomlin Wilding and Dr. Wen Lawson. And actually, I prefer these terms. I think that they are more positive, and I think they also describe PDA to me much better, because I don't find the individuals with PDA that I work with particularly controlling ever. They only become controlling when they feel like they don't have autonomy. So I give the children that I work with as much autonomy as I can. So when I arrive at a session, I've got this big bag of resources and games and toys that I take to my sessions. And when I get to a session, rather than going in with a kind of plan of this is what we are doing today, or this is what I've planned for you to do, I usually just go in and put the bag down, sit on the floor and say, what would you like to do today? What would you like to look at something in my bag, or do you have something planned that you would like us to do? So I give the child a lot of autonomy in terms of what we do in our sessions. And then because they have autonomy, they feel like they have more control. So offering choices can be extremely helpful, but it is also important to be aware that making a choice or making a decision can be a demand. So it's important to be aware of that, and also just be aware that because you offer something as a choice, it doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is going to make that choice. So for example, I don't eat meat. So if somebody offered me lunch, which is very nice of them, but they offered me a ham sandwich or a chicken sandwich, I'm not going to eat either of those things just because it's been offered to me as a choice. So there does still need to be something around the choice that is somewhat attractive to the individual. Also really important to try and involve the individual with PDA in as much decision making and planning as possible. So, don't impose things upon them. So for example, if your child needed to go to the dentist, rather than saying you're going to the dentist today, you would be best to give them a little bit of warning, and then you could say to them, we need to go to the dentist today because we need to get your teeth checked because the dentist has sent me a letter. Would you like to go somewhere before the dentist or after the dentist to get a little treat? Or when we get to the dentist, would you like to go first, or would you like your brother or sister or me to go first? So within the context of going to the dentist, the child still feels that they have some autonomy. Would you like to listen to music when you're at the dentist, or would you like to have silence? So giving them some kind of choices over that experience can make it a little less anxiety provoking. And then from a learning perspective as well, it's really important to be aware that a lot of children with PDA are autodidactic, which means that they can teach themselves. So one of the first, if I just go back to the first slide, if my computer will let me, you can see here that this is one again from the book, I don't call myself a teacher anymore. I call myself a learning facilitator, and that my role is not to teach, it's just to facilitate the learning. So I could give as much autonomy as I can and allow the child to sort of, teach themselves, but I'm there to sort of support and learn together. I do lots of stuff with the children that I work with. Right, I'll just go back to where I was. This is a really, really important point about PDA. PDAs are often very, very sensitive to non-verbal communication. So you can see in this picture here, I'm asking the child in a normal voice, shall we go out? But the child is actually perceiving that I'm shouting at them in an aggressive way. Shall we go out? So even though my voice is saying one thing, the child with PDA is hearing something very, very different. When I'm doing training with lots of parents, I often say to parents, put your hand up if your child has ever accused you of shouting at them when you haven't shouted. Almost every hand goes up. Put your hand up if your child has ever accused you of shouting when you're not shouting, or you're angry and you're not angry. Almost every hand goes up. So it's really, really important that we are aware of this. So it's anything to do with non-verbal communication, so tone of voice, facial expression, gesture. So a little sigh of frustration, a little eye roll will be picked up on. I like to use an analogy of a smoke detector. So a neurotypical child is like a smoke detector that goes off if there's a fire in a building. That's the right level of sensitivity. It tells the child, right, there's a danger, you need to leave. The PDA child is like a smoke detector that goes off if somebody walks past the house outside with a cigarette. they are so sensitive, they will pick up on that and the fire alarm will go off. And so the child will often sense danger or sense a threat when there isn't one. That's why it's really important that you need to be aware of your own emotional regulation, because if you are feeling angry and stressed yourself or anxious, you could actually really impact the child, young person with PDA. But it's also a really good opportunity for you to talk about how you manage your emotions. So if I have maybe, I had this experience a few months ago. I was seeing a child with PDA, and the night before I'd had some, very sad news. So when I got to the child's house, I told the parents beforehand what had happened. And when I got to the child's house, he knew that I'd had this sad news, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, not really." I said, "I feel really sad today." I said, "So I'm trying to sort of allow myself to be sad, but also think about happy things as well." And we had a really good chat about grief and sadness and loss. And it was the best chat that we'd ever had about his emotions, actually, because I was telling him how I feel. So I've just got some examples here of ways that you can rephrase language to make it less demanding. So instead of instructing someone to sit down, you could ask them where they want to sit. If instead of "start work, would you like to work with me or have a go on your own?" Instead of "stop talking, I wonder if you can work on this quietly for a few minutes." Instead of "line up now, where would you like to stand?" Offering a choice of tasks to start on. So these are very much school-based type of demands, but I'm sure if you're watching this as a parent, again, it's about thinking about how you can offer more autonomy in your language in other ways as well. One of the things that really don't work with children with PDA is those very traditional autism strategies. So very strict rewards and sanctions, now next boards, timers, visual planners, all of those things can create more anxiety because they feel demanding. So rewards and sanctions won't work. Those classroom displays with very sort of public, this is how many house points you've won or lost, can cause real anxiety. If these kind of now next boards do help with transitions, then make sure again that the young person has say in that. So just to be really honest, it can be very difficult for a lot of schools to create the right environment for children with PDA. So in the UK, I've worked with a lot of primary schools that have done some fantastic work with children with PDA, and then the transition into our secondary system is much harder for them. So here in the UK, it's estimated that at least 70% of children with PDA don't access their education in school. And as we go through our school system, they have less and less autonomy, which is why it's so important that we have raised understanding of PDA in schools, because it can work with the right approach. We need to be very careful with praise with PDAs. Direct praise can really backfire. It can set up an expectation to either repeat or improve something that they've done. It can feel patronizing or a bit fake if the individual feels that they're kind of the same level as the person that's delivering the praise. It can put someone in the spotlight, and it can also then create a demand of how to respond as well. So we just need to find different ways to praise. So I use a lot of I statements in praise instead of praising. So I'll say things like, "Oh, I love that idea," or "I wouldn't have thought of doing that. How did you come up with that idea?" You can also talk about natural consequences. So again, at home, you might say, "Oh, it's great that you've had a bath or tidied your room or eaten your dinner because you've got more time to play on the Xbox now," or "We can watch a film together. What would you like to choose?" So it's more about natural consequences. For children that find it difficult to get into school, don't praise them for coming into school, because that can create, more stress and demand. If we're going to use rewards with PDAs, they need to be very high value to them. And they also need to be very instantaneous. They can't wait too long for them. Another really nice thing to do with PDA is just let them hear you talking about them in a positive way. So if you're watching this as a professional, you could talk to a colleague. If you're watching this as a parent, you could talk to each other. You could just say, I've had a really lovely day with so-and-so today. You know, just had lots of fun together. And then once you've got that really good connection, again, as a professional, you can use humour as part of your praise as well. So that's the end of my presentation. We'll have some time for questions now. That really was I know it was a very short amount of time to talk about PDA, because I could talk about it all day. I've just left my links up there in case anybody wants to get in touch. You've got the name of the book as well. So I'll stop sharing. I don't know if anybody has got any questions. I think they were going to be put in the chat if there were any. I don't know if there's any questions, Krishna, that have come in. Hi. There's no questions on the live feed. That's fine. If anybody thinks of anything that they wanted to ask, afterwards, that's absolutely fine. You can always drop me a message on my Facebook page. But I hope that was helpful. I hope it was helped for you to have a better understanding of PDA. As I say, it's fascinating. It can be complex. So if anybody would like to learn more, then do get in touch. But I think if there's no more questions, then we can stop. Okay, right. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. Oh, hang on. I think there's something coming through. I'm just checking the chat. Let's see if I can find it on Facebook, see if there's any questions. Okay, what if still no response after giving a choice in a mainstream school? Okay, what if... Oh, sorry, I've got an echo here. So, yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, just because we're offering a choice doesn't mean that someone is just going to make that choice. So I think it's about, say you were offering, you can do this maths or this maths, and they're like, well, I'm not doing either. Then you can say, yeah, you think the first thing you have to do is like really validate and just say, yeah, I understand this is really tricky. I understand that you don't like maths. How about we look at something that we know you've done before, and if we can build on that. So you could then find two different tasks. I think also we do have to look at the bigger picture. So it could be like if they're, for example, they're refusing to do the work in the classroom, perhaps because of the sensory element of that. You could say, yeah, I know you find it really difficult working in here, so I can stay in here and work with you, or we could go and find a quiet space outside. So it's about, you can still use those choices, but you have to use them, I think, very flexibly sometimes as well. And again, if it's a bit like the example I gave about, even if I was really hungry, if someone offered me ham or chicken sandwich, I'm not going to eat them. I don't eat meat. So then someone would have to say, okay, well, Laura, what do you like? And then they'd have to sort of move on to something quite different. So if it's a complete no, then you do sometimes have to sort of look outside and step aside from the demand that you have created to find something that they would be more willing to do. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions. Sorry, it's easy for me to see them on here. So I'm just looking at your comments, Amal. So just stays, you're saying they stay sort of on muted, so they're experiencing mutism, which is usually, again, due to very, very high anxiety. Also, it could be the demand to speak or the demand to have a conversation is a way of them not having to meet other demands as well. So it sounds, if this is the same young person, it sounds like they're really struggling and they're very, very anxious. So what I would be really looking at is a way to try and reduce that anxiety, to make sure that they feel, is there a way to help them feel safer in the school environment? Is there a way that they can you know, just work with someone, just to sort of be in an environment where they can feel safer, build up a connection, because if they haven't got that safe person and if they haven't got a safe place, then the demands of doing any schoolwork are going to be really, really difficult. So it sounds like the selective mutism is more of, it could be a combination of both very high anxiety and a way of avoiding demands. I've worked with a young person once that would just go into school and sleep because that was their way of avoiding demands, and the main reason that they were doing that was because they just did not feel safe in that environment. So I think that young person, it sounds like it needs to be stripped right back so that they have an opportunity to feel safer in that environment. So I hope that helps. Just seeing if there's any other questions. I can't see any others. Yeah, so the sleeping. So sleeping is a way, you know, sleeping is something that I get asked about a lot by parents. Sleep can be very difficult to comply with the demand of sleeping. Lots of reasons behind that, but again, quite a lot of the young people that I work with become almost nocturnal because during the day there are so many more demands placed upon them, whereas at night the demands are reduced. There's less people around, school is closed at night. So there's often a sort of pattern that can develop when a young person becomes very anxious about stuff that they're being expected to do in the daytime. Sleep becomes a way of avoiding those things. Also, we know that autistic individuals often have a non-24-hour sleep cycle, so they can get into a sleep cycle that means it's actually very, very difficult for them to go to bed or go to sleep at night and then wake up in the morning. So yeah, sleep is very difficult. So it might be worth looking into that as well, like sleep cycle, the 24-hour circadian sleep cycle and autism, because a lot of the young people that I've worked with experience that. Hey, are there any other questions? You're welcome, Amal. I hope that was helpful. Good luck, basically. And yeah, do get in touch if there's anything else I can help with. Okay, there's no further questions. So thank you very much for having me, Autism Connect. And I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it's helpful for people that might watch it on catch up as well. So Krishna, shall I just I'll leave now, shall I? Or will you end the live? Oh, I'm going to wait. Thank you, Vicky.